Earthlings, welcome to yet another Still Alive, and we can announce, Ronnie, that we are. I think we can.
Yeah,
on
definitely
safe bet,
still
aren't we?
alive. I've got my T-shirt on from National Animal Rights Day on
Oh
Sunday.
yeah. Tell us a bit about that. Go on.
Yeah, well, there was almost 150 towns and cities throughout the world took part in Animal Rights National. It was kind of International Global Animal Rights Day, really, where people did all these different events in various towns and cities throughout the world.
Yeah.
Which were all in their own way were really vegan outreach events. I mean, I took part in one in Birmingham where we did a march around part of the city centre. People were giving out leaflets promoting veganism to members of the public, and there was the reading out of the Declaration of Animal Rights, and some speeches, and it was a really positive event, and the same thing took place in many other places, and I think that was a really good day for veganism throughout the world.
And you gave a talk.
And I gave a short speech about the importance of vegan outreach everywhere. My usual.
Yeah,
my
I don't
usual
suppose anybody in the comment
Yes.
will have a clue what you said. No.
No. I mean, hopefully that will be shared. Unfortunately, the sound quality wasn't great because we didn't have a sound system, which probably would have been all right, except for the background noise. There's a lot of background noise, so I've got to look at kind of tidying it up.
And Andy might be able to help with that.
Yeah, I think Andy might be able to help on that. It was kind of unfortunate. We had people next to us who was this.
Help. Here's a cavalry.
Send in the video. Yeah. I'll get the video over to Andy. There was because it was also a day of action for the two dogs that were shot by the police, Marshall and Millions, the one shot in London.
Yeah, but wasn't there some talk of they thought that the two things might merge and they didn't?
No, I kind of think they were just separately organised, and it was just a coincidence because I didn't know anything about there was going to be this demo for the dogs, and that was a nationwide event with that taking place in lots of different places, and in many places it was the one that they were doing in Birmingham was right next to ours. So there was kind of quite a lot of noise from that sort of interfered with ours.
Okay, and here's the big question: which one was biggest?
It's hard to say. To be quite honest, I think theirs was a bit. The dog people.
That's what you'd expect, isn't it? That's the thing.
Yeah, and I mean, we said to them, "Look, come on the march with us," and I don't think any of them did. So it's kind of ironic, really, isn't it, that there's these people that are kind of protesting about two dogs being shot. And yet they're paying people to shoot cows for them to eat, aren't they? The same people, and for the most part. And it's terrible those two dogs were shot. But I think it's something like here in the UK, I think two cows get shot every half a minute. For people to eat, and yet there's not the same concern.
It doesn't bear thinking about, really, does
it?
But
that's only cows. I mean, that's not all the other animals, of course.
The disconnect.
Yeah,
anyway, we've got a job to do, Ronnie, rather than reminisce about your weekend. Well done for another talk promoting veganism. And of course, that's what we're talking about. Whether there are some claims in the movement that vegan education has been going on forever, and it's been a bit of a failure, so we want to look critically at that. Our short answer to the thing, has it failed, will be no, but we'll go through the reasons for that. Yeah. So, people, welcome along to Still Alive. I was saying to myself, don't say vegan time tunnel. Don't say vegan time tunnel. So there you go. Okay,
but you said it. didn't you? Nevertheless,
I did what?
You still said it though, didn't you?
Well, just now, yeah. But I mean, I didn't say it then, which is the most important thing. Which is so I didn't completely mess up. Terry is saying that there's. I just watched Animal Liberation TV recent video about Mel. All right.
Yeah, Mel's been. I understand Mel's been released from prison now.
Yeah, that was a good month ago or so, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was. I think it was a few weeks ago. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Right. So we're here to talk about vegan outreach as we know it, really, and kind of, we're just going to explore, when it started, when it became the thing, and then I got some slides to show, which is an edit of one of my time tunnels. So I just want to go through a few of those along with you, Ronnie, because you haven't really commented on them. But it's kind of like we normally say things now, like veganism is the moral baseline of the movement and those kind of things. And as we know, we were both press officers, right? And we know that, I mean, can you remember talking about veganism much when you did the press? Because I don't.
No, not at all.
No.
No, I mean, I was vegan and very dedicated to kind of being vegan, but I never really spoke about veganism or even really promoted veganism a great deal, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, people think that. I imagine for people joining the vegan movement now, what we're about to say is going to be quite strange, and some of it's going to be a bit of a shock. For example, this little document here, which is Boycott Veganism by DXE, right? And so they put an essay out a few years ago called Boycott Veganism, and one of the first lines is, the first thing you should boycott is neither meat nor dairy nor eggs. The first thing you should boycott is veganism. So this points to that argument that goes on, or this position that is promoted, that veganism shouldn't be the moral baseline, activism should. And so you've got that thing, again, in the movement about, we should bring non-vegans into the movement, which I don't think anybody would disagree with that. It's just a question of, can you have an animal rights campaign run by non-vegans for very long? So we're back to that kind of problem, really, and so we're really into, in this sense at least, we're into the kind of pressure campaign type thing, where it doesn't matter if you're not vegan, is almost like a suggestion, right? And that if we restrict things just to vegans, then there's going to be a problem, a numbers problem, not least, right? So yeah.
I think the thing is, though, I mean, campaigning for veganism, though, has to be restricted to vegans, because it's only vegans that are going to campaign for veganism. I think, other single issue campaigns, some single issue campaign against animal experimentation. Yeah, I wouldn't deter non-vegans from getting involved in that. I would hope that they would become vegan through rubbing shoulders with vegans that are also involved in that campaign, and that has been what's happened, of course.
Yeah, the end of this document, this is Boycott Veganism by DXE. We need to build up a community and a movement that can take on the mantle of these previous brave activists and pursue a vision of social justice. I'm confident you'll agree when we look more carefully at the progress they achieved and compare it to the relatively futility of the modern animal rights movement. And when you do, I'm just as confident that you'll, like me, boycott veganism. So that's the end of this document. And so it's actually saying that, I don't know if you can see that just here, harmful there. It says here that they're going to make the case that the concept of veganism is harmful to other animals and to the animal rights movement. So we have to get away from this idea that there's a unified agreement that veganism is the moral baseline and that veganism should be the thing that we should kind of concentrate. It's just not true. That there's always been a problem with some groups, and the national groups can be the worst sometimes. Yeah, we've, as Andy says, there's still a push for veganish. I don't mind veganish because at least they're not claiming to be vegans, so that's not too bad. Have you heard about veganish, Ronnie?
I've heard the word.
Mm.
Yeah, I've heard the word.
Oh,
Yeah,
so it's veganish. At least they're not
I
pretending.
I thought it was someone saying vegans that had a lisp.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, there's I mean, I think there was something today on social media about Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I mean, obviously he was in Changers. I don't know if he's going to be in the sequel, but he's been described, or I don't know whether he described himself as this, but he's been described, or he described himself as 80% vegan, right?
But the trouble is, you can't be 80% vegan, can you? What if someone said, "Well, I'm 80% anti-racist"? What sense would that make? It wouldn't make any sense. See, veganism is a philosophy.
Well, you know what the answer to that is, don't you? Is that if racism was as widespread as speciesism, then it would make sense, they'd say.
Well, I'm not sure it would, because it's either it's either one thing or the other, isn't it? You're either racist or you're anti-racist, and I think you're either kind of like in favour of animal liberation, or you're not. I mean, I think the additional thing about kind of like being vegan is it's two components, isn't there? Really, to being vegan. I mean, first of all, is like you need to accept the philosophy of animal liberation. You need to agree. You need to believe. You need to feel that it's wrong for humans to indeed, that all oppression and exploitation is wrong, but particularly focus on the oppression and exploitation of other animals by humans. You've got to accept that that's wrong. But the second component of veganism is that you try to kind of live according to that. In other words, that you're kind of adopting a vegan diet, and you're avoiding involvement in other forms of animal exploitation, for instance. And it's those two components, isn't there? There's what you believe in and what you do in practice.
But one problem, though, Ronnie, is that veganism is often and still quite often presented as a diet, isn't it?
Yeah, the philosophical side of it is ignored or missed out, but that's not veganism, because right from the beginning, right from the founders of the vegan movements, for them it was a philosophy.
Do you know, Ronnie? Though I don't think that matters. I think we as long-term vegans are probably going to have to understand that we're losing the vegan movement, and we're losing the animal liberation movement, and we're losing it often to the right. But we're also getting a lot of people who are determined to slim down, neuter, and limit the meaning of veganism, either to a diet or to other things. In Jason Quarry, I believe, surname, saying omnivores are about 8% plant-based. You see that there's a new vegan channel, I'm not going to name it because I don't want to advertise it, who is arguing things like, if someone is opposed to someone else punching a cow in the face for no reason, then that person is a vegan, which basically means that kind of, in a sense, everybody is a vegan. And we've had this push for a good 10 years now, with people like Melanie Joy and in particular Tobias Leonhardt, who said the way to get the vegan movement bigger and stronger is to lower the bar of entry. And so often it means that you have a vegan movement full of non-vegans who call themselves vegan, and they think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Now, obviously, we're going to push back on that. I mean, what's the point of having a social movement made up of people who are not telling the truth about their own position?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And how low? If you start lowering the bar, how low do you lower it? That's the problem.
Well, I mean, that was a weird thing, because I mean, we've got some examples coming up, but we've got examples like eating eggs is vegan, eating fishes is vegan. This new site is suggesting that you've got a situation where the odd flesh a meal doesn't mean that you're not vegan anymore. It just means that you're not adhering to the philosophy at that time. So we're into the kind of Peter Singer element, and of course that's really interesting at this time, because Peter Singer is now getting a heck of a lot of publicity again because of the 50 years of animal liberation, including within the movement. So it's no surprising that you've got Wayne Sean promoting Singer, you've got Peter carrying on promoting Singer, and so on and so forth. I mean, the truth is really is, if we are very candid about this, we don't have a vegan animal rights movement. We don't. We have an animal welfare movement run by a welfarist cartel that calls itself animal rights, and that's about as far as we've got. You know, I mean, like in Andy's film, there's a little clip from Tom Reagan. He's getting towards the end of his life, not that far in though, because he was still pretty healthy then. But he was saying that all we can say is that we've dug the footer for the scaffolding that will be animal rights. And he's basically saying we've only really just begun. And the sad part of it is that we're not building on it. If anything, we're going backwards. You know, which is really kind of Peter Stinker, more like somebody said.
But I think it's a need for, you see, I kind of I think, you know, vegan outreach is absolutely vitally important, but I think we also need inreach, in the sense that we educate people who think they are vegan about what veganism really is. So the education goes both ways. The education doesn't stop when someone, you know, says they're vegan or thinks they're vegan. You know, I think there's a need, you know, to educate those people about what veganism really means, what animal liberation really means, and the extent of the changes we need to bring about in order for animal liberation to be achieved.
You see, I find this very difficult, because I mean, Peter Singer doesn't believe in animal rights. So I mean, the interesting thing about Peter Singer is he was the mentor or the inspiration for Alex O'Connor, and Alex O'Connor didn't believe in animal rights in the same way as Peter Singer doesn't believe in animal rights, and he says that he doesn't believe in rights at all, and that's what Peter Singer says. And so they both said that rights is not a good way of basing, you know, putting it for a basis of a social movement. So Alex O'Connor said that. Peter Singer has said that since 1975, right? But this is the leading philosopher of the animal rights movement. And so if, you know, so what if he said that on the radio or Channel 4 TV, it'll mean it rhetorically. So animal rights is just a word for these people. There's no philosophical grounding. It's not rights-based like Tom Reagan. It's just a word. So often you get people saying animal rights broadly defined. They don't really mean animal rights in a Tom Reagan sense when they say that word. And so this is often a confusion in the movement. Anyway, shall we get to talking about the evolution of veganism within the movement then? Yeah. So,
yep.
I mean, our start right for us is the fact that obviously we were both spokespersons. We've already said that. I mean, you did loads of TV, you did hundreds of radio interviews. I did less of all that, but did some of it, and we didn't talk about veganism. So when did vegan come about? And the truth of that is, we're talking about, really, in terms of its full development, we're talking about this century. So the 21st century is when vegan education, this thing that is supposed to have failed, has started. And so that's our main problem with any claims that it's failed. Our response is, hang on a minute, it's only just started and it hasn't developed very much. And so all the gains that we've seen in recent years, and I think everybody will suggest that there has been gains, has been a very small group of people doing it, because as we know, Ronnie, most vegans are not active.
Yes, and the amount that veganism has increased compared with the amount of outreach is kind of, in a sense, phenomenal. Really, there's only been a really small amount of outreach compared with what it potentially could be, and yet we've had this we've had this big increase in veganism. I think
although we did see some stats today, and we're still struggling a little bit
with stats. It's very difficult because when surveys are taken, it really depends on what questions are asked, and often the questions are asked regarding diet. So that wouldn't necessarily mean that everyone who identified as a vegan would be a philosophical vegan. Although it does seem to me that most people who say they're vegan do so out of concern for other animals. I mean, obviously, there's people that say they're vegan for health reasons, vegan for the environment, but it still seems to be that the biggest reason for people saying they've gone vegan is out of concern for other animals.
Yeah, that is true. That is very true.
Yeah.
I really wish, Joanna, that this was true. The sad part is that when Tom Reagan was with us, people still talked more about the singer, and in fact, they marginalized Reagan repeatedly and systematically, to the extent that as soon as he died, even his own foundation, which he started with his wife Nancy Reagan, they started to make him invisible in the foundation that he founded. It's an absolute disgrace. It's a movement scandal, really, what we've done to Tom Reagan and what we're doing to Tom Reagan's legacy. It's an absolute outrage, really, in my view. So unfortunately, this is not true, because he was around and he was still ignored, which is the sad part of it, really. So look, this is a AR zone, animal rights zone. So Ronnie and I were involved with that in the early part. Well, I suppose the first 10 years of the century, Ronnie. So this is 2011, and this is it was called a chat. This was kind of really before YouTube developed, and so you would do text interviews on screen, and so people could watch along. So it was a little bit like this, except there'd be no screen. There'd just be the chat. That's what it looked like, right? And so that's how it worked. And Matt Ball, co-founder of Vegan Outreach, was asked about the name. But just to put some numbers on this, we're talking about formation in the early 90s. They changed their name into about 1993. Their first outreach was Why Vegetarian, and then they moved towards Why Vegan around about 1996, 97, and everything. And so they were known as the group that would give pamphlets out to university students. And Tim Geyer of AR Zone asked Matt Ball whether they would still call it Vegan Outreach if they had the chance again. And they said no. So actually, we had a serious question about that about 6 years ago. So this was in 2011, 6 years ago. For a variety of reasons, we didn't change the name. But I know having vegan in our name hurts us in different ways, most clearly on fundraising. Foundations and rich non-vegans give to groups with similar philosophies and approaches, but don't give to vegan outreach. And so there was a lot of resistance to funding vegan outreach back in those days. But we're talking about 2005, 2006 here.
I think there's still the same resistance, to be honest. I don't think it's to do with the word vegan. I think it's to do with kind of people's people have this kind of immediatist point of view, and so they tend to give to things where they see some immediate effects. taking place from what those people are doing. In fact, like if I put two appeals up, one was for vegan outreach and the other was for an animal sanctuary, the animal sanctuary would get far more money. And yet, in actual fact, far more animals are going to be spared from suffering and slaughter by vegan outreach than they are by the animal sanctuary. And yet people would give to the animal sanctuary. It's probably the same with single issue campaigns. You know, if there was a campaign to say we want to close this laboratory, or we want to close this, even let's close this slaughterhouse, and you know, give us a load of money to close this slaughterhouse. If you had that side by side with a campaign for vegan outreach, it would be the one that wanted to close the slaughterhouse that would get the money, because people see that as an immediatist thing. There's that slaughterhouse, animals are going into it, it's terrible, let's close it. And they don't, and people don't think, people find it really difficult to think more deeply that why are the animals going into the slaughterhouse? It's because people consume animal products, and so we need vegan outreach.
Yeah, but Ronnie, you can take a picture of closed sign on the slaughterhouse.
You see, so it's the same today. It's really, really difficult even these days to raise funds for vegan outreach, because people have this kind of thing. They really only see what's in front of them, because, you know, to discuss the effects of vegan outreach, it needs some sort of a deeper understanding. It's a cause and effect thing. It's a cause and effect. You know, like it's, you know, it's ending the demand, so then you end the supply. And then and it's also, you know, changing individuals, so you change the culture, so you change the politics, right? And these are kind of deeper issues for people to understand than an animal immediately in front of them that's been rescued and is in a sanctuary, or animals going into a slaughterhouse and people there, you know, with placards wanting to close that slaughterhouse down. People, that's an immediate thing in front of people, and people somehow kind of get attracted to that, and they find it more difficult to consider deeper issues that actually will create greater change, will spare far more animals from oppression, and will actually bring about animal liberation.
It's less visible, isn't it, Ronnie?
Yeah, rescues won't bring about animal liberation. People standing outside slaughterhouse, closing slaughterhouses down one by one, won't bring about animal liberation. What will bring about animal liberation is changing the culture of society. That means educating, you know, a sufficient number of people to become vegan. So you change the culture, and with changing the culture, you also change the politics as well. That's how you bring about real change. But it's very hard for people to grasp that. People want to give to things that they see immediately in front of them. So, as I say, we still have the same trouble these days raising funds for vegan outreach.
I mean, don't forget, people are emotional beings, rightly so, and there is kind of a little bit of emotional blackmail to these things. You know, if you don't give us money, these other animals, which we've got a picture of, are going to die.
Yeah. But if you don't give money to vegan outreach, and we can't educate, you know, other people to go vegan, then loads more animals are going to die.
But
you know, far greater.
But that's kind of abstract and out of focus, isn't it?
Yeah. I know, but it's people's lack of, and this is why the world's hurtling towards destruction. This is why we got the climate crisis, because people aren't able to think long term. They only think what's immediate in front of them. Oh, you know, this kind of global heating and all the problems, that's some way off. I'm not going to bother to do anything about it. And then all of a sudden it's right on top of us and it's too late.
Yeah, well, I imagine that in terms of what you just said, probably analogy with Live Aid would probably be relevant, in the sense that there was the big emotional appeal. You had it on the TV. You had the usual pictures of the kids with flies in their eyes and big distended stomachs. And yet the issue of starvation and food security is much more complicated and much more political than that.
Yeah, and you've got all these, why don't all these rich buggers, these rich musicians, you know, they're asking poorer people to give money, aren't they?
Well, that's the way it always works.
Out your own bloody pocket. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, they've done surveys where people who are relatively poor give more percentage than people who are relatively rich. So we already know that.
I mean, I found that
the rich tend to give money when it's a tax break.
I kind of found that when I was doing like street stalls and kind of collecting money at the same time. I found that often the poorer areas, you actually got more donations, because what happened was people wouldn't give so much, but more people would give. You see, so you actually collected more in the poorer areas.
Yeah. I always felt very, very sad about getting my expenses when I was at the BYV, because we were doing stalls in Liverpool, and a little old lady with a pension used to come up and put £1 in and go, "Oh, this is terrible, isn't it?" And then you'd see her about 2 months later and, "Oh, is this still happening? Isn't it terrible?" And give you another £1 and all that. And so I used to feel as guilty as hell putting in for £12.50 expenses, to go from Liverpool to London, on the coach. I would always go on the coach because it was cheaper than the train, because I felt so guilty, because I was thinking that's 12 of this type of woman giving the £1 donation out of their pension. I always felt really bad about it. Well, look, let's go to add to screen. Here we go. So we've seen what was going on in North America. This is Britain, and so Britain was always a little bit ahead, as usual. So we're into the late 1990s. So the interesting story about this is the around about 96, there's a proposal within the Vegan Society, and Robin Lane here is the one. I think he's on the council, right? So this is Robin Lane's interview. He was the press officer for the LF after you, wasn't he, Ronnie?
Yeah, and he also got sent to prison, not for as long as me. He used to be like kind of the kind of
everybody you befriend gets sent to prison. Ronnie. What's going on?
The press officer, that anyone that was the press officer got sent to prison, and of course, I mean, I got a 10-year sentence. I think Robin only got about 9 months because he hadn't been a press officer very long.
Oh, absolutely doesn't even count. 9 months doesn't even count. No. So we ought to do a poll, see how many of your close friends ended up in prison, see if we can find a common denominator, and it's you, isn't it? So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I kind of know quite a number of ex-prisoners, well, including yourself, of course.
Oh, look at that. I'm so predictable. Yeah. I'm so predictable. So anyway, but 96, the Vegan Society membership wanted to have a vegan festival in Britain. And the Vegan Society refused to do it because they said it was going to be too much work and probably too expensive for them to do it. And so Robin had a group called CAFT, which was Campaign Against Leather and Fur. And so they decided to do it. And so by the time they all got organized, it was 1998, held in London, as it says there. And then it started to regionalize after a bit, Ronnie.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the London vegan festivals, and they were great, really grassroots affairs where, people weren't priced out. Some of the vegan festivals these days, the cost for stalls it's so much money to have a stall there that the kind of smaller grassroots groups can't afford it. But the London Vegan Festival was great. It was like, I think it was either free to get in or it was only £1. It was like really cheap to get in, so the entrance fee didn't deter non-vegans from going in. And
I think the good news is that some of the up and coming veg fests are free to get in, I think.
Well, I mean, that's great. I think the thing is you have to too high a price on entry, and what will happen is you'll deter non-vegans from going, and that's the very thing you don't want to do. I mean, I see the primary aim of vegan fairs and vegan festivals has to be to educate non-vegans to go vegan, and that's.
No, let's not do that. Otherwise, I'll be contractually obliged to rip my shirt off and throw it on the
floor. as long as it's not,
Okay, so
you're underpants.
But the takeaway from this slide, people, is that even in Britain, veganism is just getting into gear at the end of the last century, right? That's the takeaway from this.
Yeah.
So here's Viva, and I've got the offending article over here. So this is 2000. So this is this century, of course, beginning of. The group is still called Vegetarian International Voice for Animals. 2000, and what we're getting now is we're starting to get a move towards veganism, but it's very slow, takes many years, as we'll see. And the worrying thing about it is when veganism does start to raise its head, as it were, it's usually presented as a diet. So the yellow bit is presenting veganism as a diet. I don't know if people can see it a bit easier by that. But the interesting part about it is, even though you've got the vegan bit at the bottom, you've still got the little bit in white where it said we are offering free Go Veggie information packs.
So I've got some leaflets from Viva that are probably about, well, they're less than 10 years old. I've still got them. I don't know why I haven't recycled them, because I don't use them. And they say Go Veggie. They don't say Go Vegan. They say, the more up to date ones say Go Vegan.
Well, I mean, like when we talk to Animal Rising, we've still got a sniff in the air that veganism is still in some quarters.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I probably say a little bit more about later. That I think there's kind of, I think there's a kind of real sense in which it could be argued that Animal Rising might be actually doing more harm than good. Sadly.
All right. Well,
and I'll come to that later.
I mean, to be honest, you've been pretty supportive of them so far.
But I know that's a controversial thing to say, and it's only. I'm not saying yes, they definitely are, but I think it's something that could be argued, and something that could be questioned, and not just them, but all these people that are trying to kind of water down the. That kind of tend to treat vegan as a scare word. I think it applies to all of them, and and I can talk about the reasons I believe that kind of bit later.
Well, okay. Well, let's keep on our story for now. So this is 2012, and so the group is still called Vegetarian International Voice for Animals, and still promoting vegetarianism. 2012. I mean, what we talked about 11 years ago here. We dropped back to the end of the 90s here with Animal Aid, but this is where they're promoting Veggie Month, and they did that for years and years and years and years. And even when we get as far as 2006, we're still getting the Veggie Month being promoted. But here is where, again, it starts to change, and you start to get some vegan elements to it. And again, I think I've got the document here. And again, this vegan bit, it's, why don't you try a vegan diet? It's presented as a diet. It's so disappointing that when they finally start to loosen up a little bit and start letting vegan come in to their vocabulary, it's presented as a diet. And I mean, we're talking about 2006 here. We're not talking about many years ago. And so again, this is why this kind of story is quite a shock sometimes for recent vegans. This is 2012. Now I've got that as well. This is an Animal Aid school pack. You'll see the thing. Andy will love that, against all animal cruelty. And so this is a pack that they will give to their schools speakers, and essentially they start off with what is a vegetarian and what is a vegan. So both of those are presented as a diet, and then apart from that one little section there's no other mention of veganism at all in this document. And this is 2012. From Animal Aid. And so again, we've still got a big reluctance in the movement, and I just want to point out that this is not a critique of any of the groups or any of the people involved in the groups. What we're talking about really is the evolution of veganism becoming central to the movement. And as we can see, it's recent and it took a long time, and people were clearly not comfortable with it.
And I think like kind of we're equally, responsible way back for ourselves for not promoting veganism. So
I think we are, yeah. I think we are, yeah.
So it wouldn't be fair for us to criticize anyone else for kind of coming late to the show with it, because we were too.
Do you know, I'll tell you one thing that we're really culpable for, is the fact that when the Vegan Society were busy weakening the definition, we didn't even think of the Vegan Society as part of the movement. So we just let it happen, right? Because we didn't take any notice of the vegan society.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, so I mean that is a real kind of bad mark on our behalf in that sense. I would agree. I would agree with that. Now, this is just interesting for one particular reason. This is 1996, so this is the same year as Gary Francione produced Rain Without Thunder, which is probably still his best book, or at least really kind of interesting. And he used to run a clinic called the Rutgers Animal Rights Law Center. And here he's talking about how he goes to a meeting, and then he goes out with some of the speakers. He orders vegetarian. They order flesh, and when they notice, they ask him, "Are you still a vegetarian?" And he said, "Yes, I am still very much a vegetarian." Now, the reason this is significant for this day and age is the fact that Gary Francione went vegan in 1982 after reading Fettered Kingdoms by John Bryant, which is a book that you'll remember, Ronnie. It was pretty famous at the time. And so more than a decade after becoming a vegan, you're still self-identifying as a vegetarian. So this just wouldn't happen now, right? This just kind of wouldn't happen. And so again, we're talking about the evolution of what went on in our movement. Here's a couple of Francione books, 1996 and 2000. Both of these books, there are no mention of veganism. There is some reference in the index in this one to vegetarianism, but nothing at all to for veganism. So again, as the century turned, veganism is still not really on our radar that much. Certainly not in terms of academia, not in terms of the national groups. It's, as you said before, Ronnie, it's the grassroots. Now, hang on a minute. I've got some rubber gloves because I've got this this one. So this is the introduction to carnism. And as you can see from the index there, this is 2010, no mention of veganism. 2010, no mention of veganism, but lots of mentions of vegetarianism. And then the thing that is a shock to a lot of people is this idea that it's possible to procure eggs and dairy products without violence in this particular book. I noticed today on Instagram, somebody was promoting this book and promoting the concept of carnism without any clue about what it means, because you've got activists now, some fairly big names in the movement, who go under the name of carnism. They're taking this vegetarian product and this vegetarian concept, and they're trying to make it a vegan one, and it's just not. This is a vegetarian idea, and it baffles me, and it's baffled me for years, why this vegetarian concept has taken such a hold on the vegan movement. I just don't understand it. But this is 2010. We're not talking about a long time ago. 2017. So this is Tobias Leonhardt, who works with Melanie Joy. Forward by Peter Singer. So all the strands and loose ends are starting to are trying to tie themselves up here. And so what do you get from Tobias Leonhardt when he talks about his version of veganism? He says that it's a diet. It's a young movement. It's about food. So he used to give workshops, still does, I believe, and they used to be paid ones. You have to pay to go to them. It would be full of young, impressionable new vegans, and he would tell them that veganism is a diet. And then he would say, people in the movement say that we should always be open and clear that veganism is the end goal. I don't know why they say that. I don't understand that. He thinks that we should hide the fact that veganism is the end goal. We're only talking about a few years ago here, and and so we've got this thing. Don't talk about veganism, because as far as the vegan strategist was concerned, or is concerned, we're still in a pre-vegan stage. It's still not time to talk about it. And this is everybody's favorite slide. Someone who eats fishes or sometimes a cookie with an egg is still a vegan in my eyes. And so we've got these strands, this resistance in the movement to veganism. This is 2017. So the first picture here is Peter and Paul and Linda McCartney. This is the 1990s. When we get into much more recent years, you've got McCartney here, but they still say go vegetarian because McCartney never went vegan, and so they couldn't put a vegan label on it. Not that they necessarily would, because Peter have been another group that have been a bit scared of the word vegan to the extent of this. This is 2019. This is 4 years ago, people.
I mean, this is totally ridiculous. Chicks love a person who eats eggs, right? Therefore condemning, untold numbers of like male chicks to be gassed or macerated. and when they grow to be adults, to be the hens to be slaughtered at about 18 months old. They sure do love a vegetarian, don't they?
I guess they do. So, but I mean, again, the time here is, for some, relative new vegans, it's going to be quite a shock, right? Now, this is online right now. And just to prove it, I can switch to the actual, this is the website, Peter UK, and, hang on a minute, I didn't switch. There we go. So this is live. This is right now online. And so you've got vegetarians and vegans. But if we go back to this one, which was for a shorter, a younger age group, still live right now, they describe veganism as a special type of vegetarian. So this is now. This is not a few years ago. This is now. And so we've still got this thing in the movement where there's this resistance.
I mean, the difficulty is because, of course, vegetarianism is a diet, veganism is a philosophy.
Well, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know, would you, Ronnie?
You wouldn't know. So you can't be it's kind of not really, in a sense, related to vegetarianism at all, in a sense, because vegetarian isn't a philosophy and veganism is.
And then we're coming to the end of this now, and so this is animal equality, and this is 2021 when they're getting a $3 million donation for their farm animal welfare campaigns. Over the last few years, they've had almost $11 million for their welfare campaigns, and the same goes for Mercy for Animals. They've got $25 million the last few thing for their corporate welfare campaign, they call it. The last donation is 2022, so last year, and it was almost $12.5 million for animal welfare campaigns. And so maybe this is one reason why there is some resistance to the idea of promoting veganism, because again, just like Matt Ball said, there's not the money in it. So this is the Australian, and so this is I think you've got to actually subscribe to get this. But if a large number of people half their meat intake, it would have a bigger impact than doubling the small number of vegans, which is probably true on the grounds that the reason that we've still got a small number of vegans is that vegan education is still being kind of sat on by the movement.
The other side, the other thing to add to that is that in the process of educating people to become vegan, there will be some people that will actually kind of not be able to become vegan, but they will reduce their intake of animal products. I mean, in practical terms, I can tend to get this all the time when I'm doing, like outreach stalls. I'll have someone come up to me and say, "Oh, like after seeing you a few weeks ago, I've cut down on my meat and dairy," and I think, well, I never asked you to do that. All I did was I promoted veganism. But like as a response to that, you've actually reduced, you've reduced your intake of those products, even though that isn't what I asked you to do. And so that will people will do that anyway. They'll kind of think, well, I can't do all of it, but I'll try to do some of it, even though that's not what we're suggesting to them.
Yes, indeed. And then the final one is, this is still yet to come. Now, this is on the 24th of this month. So this is Leonard Pro Veg and someone from Mercy for Animals, the group that's just got £12.5 million for their welfare campaign, going to be talking at a university about animal advocacy. So I wonder what that's going to be called. In fact, it was announced that Leonard's talk is going to be something called the 10 things I've learnt in 20 years of campaigning. And one of them is that there's no reason why we can't eat eggs, because we can have a symbiotic relationship with hens. We provide them with food and shelter, and they provide us with eggs. And so this is still the stuff that is all over the place. This is the University of Kent, and they're having a conference later this month in which these welfarists and these anti-vegan people will be addressing the place. I mean, this is 2023, people, and we wonder why, and then we've got people cheeky enough, Ronnie, to say that vegan education has failed. How can it fail? It hasn't started. It's been kicked into touch all the time.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of vegan education that has actually taken place compared with the potential for it is really tiny. It's really, really tiny, and yet, considering that, we have achieved a great deal in terms of people becoming vegan. I mean, according to figures from the Vegan Society, in the last 9 years, the number of vegans has increased 5-fold, and it's interesting that when you look at the figures, the kind of this kind of been a slow. I've seen figures from 2014 to 2019, where I think the increase was about 100,000. Was it 100,000 a year? And then the next lot of figures, I think, was something you kind of came up with earlier, Roger, which showed that that's kind of slowed, and over the past few years, the increase has only been 100,000 over the last few years. But what is it we've had in the last few years? Right? We've had COVID. And what did COVID do? That stopped people getting out on the streets. That stopped a lot of outreach from taking place. So that kind of shows, in a sense, the effectiveness of outreach. The fact that when we weren't able to do so much outreach.
So even with COVID, we still see an increase.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty good, isn't it? I mean, given that. But I mean, the overall problem is the fact that vegan outreach is being called a failure, but there's simply not been enough of it ever.
No, and I think that the thing is that we have so much potential for more outreach, because we have far more vegans out there now than ever before, and it's just a question of mobilizing those vegans and getting them involved in outreach, because the problem is that we've had this increase in veganism year on year, with outreach only taking place in relatively few places. I mean, obviously, you've got outreach like the stuff on the internet, and we've had the occasional adverts on television, stuff like that. But in terms of stuff like you're on the ground outreach, it only really takes place in the centre of big cities. It only really takes place in the centre of big cities. People doing events like the Cube of Truth and We the Free, Earthlings experience, those type of things. They tend to only take place in the centre of big cities, and then only take place perhaps every couple of weeks or less frequently than that. And in most locations, throughout the UK and indeed throughout the world, no outreach takes place. There are towns that have never seen outreach. Basically, there's suburbs of cities that have never seen outreach. Villages that have never seen outreach. There's no reason why. I mean, I live in a village. I do outreach here. I deliver leaflets around the village. We held a kind of fair here, which was to promote veganism at the village hall. But most places, no, doesn't take place. So outreach takes place in very, very few locations, right? And yet we have vegans everywhere. Vegans live in all these towns, villages, suburbs, cities. And so the key is to mobilize those vegans, or at least mobilize more of them than are mobilized at the moment. That's the actual key to whether we achieve animal liberation. That we have to universalize outreach. We have to have outreach everywhere. We have to have more vegans taking part in outreach.
Even in the big cities, you get small turnouts.
Even in the big cities, it doesn't, and it's in the centre of big cities, and it's kind of targeting shoppers. I mean, all the National Animal Rights Day events on Sunday just gone. I think they all took place pretty much in big cities. There weren't any in small towns or anything like that, because of course, because I think an event like that probably kind of requires numbers, and so people come from a surrounding area. I mean, I travelled, 3/4 an hour on the train to get to the one in Birmingham, because it's a march, because it's like, involves a like a crowd of people. That's how the event works. They kind of need to be in these locations where people can gather. But outreach in suburbs, outreach in towns, in villages, doesn't require that number of people. Relatively small numbers of people can do that. I mean, I often do stores of my own, information stores of my own, or with one or two other people. I'll do door dropping on my own or with one or two other people. You don't need huge numbers. You just need committed people that are prepared to devote some of their spare time to spreading the vegan message. And we've got vegans everywhere that can do that. And it's just a question of, like, we need to mobilize vegans to become active in outreach in their own areas. And you'll get a lot more people doing that way. I mean, for instance, we've got probably locally, I would say probably about a dozen people on and off that will get involved in outreach, right? But out of all those people, there's only 2 of us actually kind of went to that event in Birmingham, right? Because most of the people are kind of more locally focused. They're happy to do things locally. They're not so keen to kind of travel some distance and away to do things. And I think that's probably the case with a lot of people that are vegan. For some reason or another, it's easier for them to stay local and do things local. And we're actually not, we're not mobilizing those people. We're not doing anywhere near enough to get those people active. There's this huge potential of people that could do outreach that we're kind of not tapping into, and to me that's the key. If we're going to have lots more outreach, is the key to how do we mobilize more vegans to get involved in outreach, even in the most simple way, because it's all spreading the message. All of it's important. You don't have to have a big crowd of people holding screens, to do it. Yeah, I'm not against that. That's great if it, when people do that. But there are much more simple ways of doing it that I think are equally as effective.
Want to go back to an issue that came up when we were talking about the increase in vegans and COVID, that kind of issue.
Yeah,
because of course, one problem is that we've got this big push at the moment to describe veganism as a diet. There seems to be a lot of people within the movement that believe it to be the case. And so those people probably tend to be the inactive vegans more so than anyone else. And so even if we've had an increase in people claiming to be vegan, they might be actually kind of self-identifying as vegan, but on a very limited scale. So all the numbers that we get from just about anywhere needs to be looked at very kind of carefully to find out who's actually calling themselves vegan, really, isn't
it? Yeah, I think obviously when surveys are done, it tends to be to do with diet. It tends to be really it's kind of people that follow a vegan diet, and of course not all those people are vegan, because if someone's following a vegan diet for health or environmental reasons and they're not doing it for reasons of animal liberation, then they're actually not vegan. But you see, I think it's still the case that the majority of people, when asked, say that they're vegan because of the animals, because of what happens to to other animals. That's still the main reason why people become vegan or say they become vegan.
Well, let me just throw in another potential problem there, in the sense that I've got the feeling recently, talked to a couple of people, and they're feeling the same, that there's a lot of people now, because of all the focus on cruelty and abuse, there's a feeling, because there's been an increase in people talking about backyard hens and riding on the backs of horses and what about honey and all this kind of stuff. I just wonder whether, if the abuse was taken out of the use to their satisfaction, whether for a lot of people who call themselves vegan, that'll be job done then.
I mean, it may well be. It may well be. But you see, once again, this comes down to education within veganism, where someone,
This is your in-reach.
In-reach, yeah, where someone claims to be a vegan, says, right, I'm vegan. But it kind of doesn't stop there, because I think those people kind of, in most cases, would still need to be educated about what veganism really is, and the extent of veganism, and indeed the extent of animal liberation, the various ways in which, I mean, I've seen on I've said this a number of times before, where it's been someone's birthday on Facebook, like kind of maybe a friend of mine, or on Facebook, or someone, I've just seen it, where a person who's vegan, who says they're vegan anyway, they've said, it's my birthday, I'm raising funds for the British Heart Foundation, please make a donation. People, there's these fundraisers people have for their birthday, and that person's doing that without realizing that the British Heart Foundation funds experiments on animals. That they're kind of they're actually totally unaware of that, because their kind of veganism is like totally focused on diet, and they're not aware of the other ways in which animals are oppressed. They're not aware that about animal experimentation and the involvement of certain medical charities in funding it. And I'll politely point out, I said, were you aware that the British Heart Foundation, might be something like Cancer Research UK or the Alzheimer's Society, one of those, they all fund animal experiments. I'll say, were you aware that this charity funds animal experiments? I don't want to be nasty to them, because I'm quite sure they were totally unaware.
And do they respond and say no?
And often they usually respond and say, no, I wasn't, and thank you for telling me. And some of them actually feel quite guilty that they've actually, they've actually kind of wanted to raise money.
If you go up to people shaking the Cancer Research tins, and you go up to them and go, this has happened to me. You go to them and say, do you fund vivisection? And they go, no. No, we don't. And then you go, do you know what vivisection is? And they say, no.
Well, I mean, I tend to talk about animal experiments, and kind of, I'll do that, and I'll say, well, I can't. No,
but the point I'm getting at is, if somebody asked them, they
oh yes, I know a lot of people. We used to have a woman come around the doors, collecting for Cancer Research UK, and she wasn't aware. And when we informed her that it was that they were involved in animal experiments, she stopped doing it.
Yeah.
And
let me tell you. Well, look, we're over the hour, Ronnie. So let's go back to vegan outreach, because that's what the focus is.
Yes.
In terms of on the street.
Yeah.
What do you say to Debbie? The problem also is that living in a smaller town, you might be the only vegan animal rights person there to do local outreach.
I mean, I'd say,
I
say
would
a couple of
extend
things.
it to say that there's a security issue as well.
Yeah,
Perhaps.
I'd say a couple of things in relation to that. I mean, first of all, that it's very likely there are other vegans. I mean, it would kind of depend on. I mean, I live in sort of medium-sized village, and there's we have other vegans here, and other vegan activists in the same village as I live. I'm not saying that would always be the case, and I think it depends on the part of the world you live, and even the kind of part of a country you live in terms of how many other vegans are. But there's so many vegans everywhere. It's very likely that there will be other vegans near you that you could persuade to kind of help in some kind of outreach. And I think people who are instigators, who instigate things and persuade other vegans to get involved, I think those people are actually absolutely vital to the spread of outreach. We need to kind of stimulate other vegans to get involved in it. But I think everyone can do something, even if someone's in an area where it's kind of they genuinely don't know other vegans, and they maybe live within what might be called a hostile community. I think there's still outreach that those people can do, like quiet kind of maybe even secretive stuff. Like I mean, one thing I do is I leave leaflets promoting veganism in public places. Like, for instance, when I went on the train on Sunday to and from Birmingham, I left vegan leaflets on like on the seat, for people to
You're
pick up.
you're littering again. That's what you're
I'm
saying.
littering, yeah, or in or in public places. Go in the library, go in your local library, and you know, and kind of put leaflets in.
I think one
different
thing that
books
worries people sometimes is if they're a bit shy, or if they don't want to talk to anybody, and there's a lot of vegans like that. So that even puts them off doing door dropping in case they get challenged by somebody.
in case someone comes out. Well, the thing is, I think that door dropping is obviously something that we can do here in the UK. Can do it in Ireland. You just kind of people have letterboxes in the doors of their homes, or they'll have a box on the wall and you can put a leaflet in there. I did some today. I delivered I think almost 150 leaflets. I went out shopping on my way home. I had time to spare, so I kind of went around some streets, delivering leaflets promoting veganism. And yeah, I can understand that somebody might be worried that someone comes out of the house, what's this nonsense and all that. My experience is that kind of doesn't really happen. I've kind of
I think that's true.
I haven't had that happen to me, but I can understand people being worried about that.
If it did, you can just say, "Oh well,
yeah." We had someone come on a door dropping thing. They said, "Oh, I'm frightened that somebody might come out of the house and that." And I said, "Well, if they do, just say, well, look, I'm just delivering leaflets. I'm from a leaflet delivery firm. I don't, why are you having to go at me?"
I haven't even read it. Yeah.
You can do that. I mean, I know it's not true, but it's kind of. But the important thing is getting the leaflet through the doors and telling that little white lie like that. I think to kind of make it easier for yourself. If people, I mean, if someone came out and said that to me, I'd front it out with them. I'd say, well, like, what's your problem and all that. I'd be like that. But I can understand that some people are a bit more kind of reticent. But that's the way. Just say, well,
you're looking for trouble, mate.
I'm just. Well, I have a stick. You see, I have a stick.
No, you don't. It's a wooden spoon.
It's a wooden spoon. Well, I have a wooden spoon actually, because this is an important thing for people doing door dropping.
Yeah, armed with a wooden spoon.
You have to be careful of dogs, because there's dogs that lurk and they'll bite your fingers when you put your. So I have a wooden spoon. I got all these cheap. I bought a selection of.
I'm going to put Graham's thing back up, Ronnie, because this is interesting. This is kind of almost like where we started with when you were talking about the pressure campaigns and everything, because the Irish Heart Foundation has said, "Oh, we only test on fishers now," and going back to things like Camp Beagle, this is what's going to happen, isn't it? That they're going to switch species.
I think yes. I think this is the difficulty that kind of. I think it's all right to kind of. I mean, obviously, with the thing with beagles, that like loads of people are attracted to beagles, people are fond of beagles. They're they're a cute little dog and all that. And it attracts attention. But once people's attention has been attracted, it's really important to inform them that experimentation on any animal is wrong. It's not just the beagles. You can use the beagles to attract attention, but you must immediately say to people, it isn't just the beagles. No. And I think that's the kind of, and if you kind of don't, then all that's going to happen is if you do succeed in ending the experiments on beagles, they'll just use a different sort of animal instead.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. You see, I mean, I kind of, I mean, in terms of door dropping, of course, there's some countries like I think the USA where you can't really do it. There might be other ways of disseminating leaflets. You might be able to leave them under the car windshield wipers, as they say there, in parking lots and stuff, perhaps. But you can certainly still leave them in public places. Certainly, put them in relevant books in libraries. Leave them in waiting rooms. There's still ways that people can spread the vegan message. And another thing is it's kind of to target events where you feel there may be some sympathy from people. I mean, we had remember we had a meeting at the town hall in my nearest town, and it was a meeting about this woman was campaigning against canned lion hunting. They do this canned lion hunting in South Africa, and she'd been out there campaigning against it, and she showed a video, and there was a load of people that came to see this, all sympathetic to the work she was doing, including I think the mayor was there and that. Well, kind of what we did, there was a group of us from our local vegan group, and afterwards we gave it as people were kind of leaving the hall, we gave them all vegan information, because we thought there's these people here, they care about one type of animal, so okay, get them to care about all of them, so that's what we did, and we gave them vegan recipes and information about the reasons for going vegan, ethical reasons, and it was all very well received. People were going, oh, thank you very much, and stuff like that, so you're kind of targeting people that are a little bit your way anyway. So and there's that kind of thing that you can do. There's all these different ways. You just got to be a bit imaginative about how you can. The other thing is community events, where you can hire a stall. We do it at these dog rescue events. We do it at environmental events. We do it at kind of where there's a local carnival and there's an event in the park connected with that, or to do with sort of fundraising for like a local charity. I mean, we wouldn't support a charity that funded animal experiments or anything like that, but another type of local charity, if they're doing a kind of fundraising event, they got stalls there, all these community events where you can kind of have a presence and promote veganism, and you might have to pay a small amount for the stall, but it's worth it. There's all these different ways of spreading the message in a local community, and we don't do it. Kind of all we do is just go in the town centre, kind of stand with some screens, give out some cards, and that's it. And that's great. I'm not against people doing that. I don't want to discourage people from doing that, but there's all these ways of doing outreach in our local communities, and we don't. There's this whole massive untapped area for outreach that we don't make use of, and I think if we did do that properly, we'd be absolutely flying. The amount of outreach, the amount of information we gave to the public would increase massively. And I kind of want to come on to why I kind of said earlier that kind of I said about our animal, ask the question, are animal rights doing more harm than good, and are these other people that are kind of that treat veganism as a scare word, are they actually doing more harm than good? And the reason I want to pose this question is this: is that if we kind of if we agree, if we believe in the importance of vegan outreach, if we want as many vegans as possible to become involved in outreach, in order to basically change lots of people as individuals, therefore you change the culture, and therefore you change the politics. So you have more vegan politicians, you have more vegans to vote for them, you change the nature of the administration, and then we'll get an administration that will put an end to animal experiments, that will kind of we'll kind of will help animal farmers to stop doing animal farming and to rewild their land or to grow grow vegetable crops instead, and all these things that all these different movements want. The people against hunting, well, they'll get what they want because you'll have people there that will probably ban hunting. People against animal experiments will get what they want. If we can create a sufficient number of vegans, and because that requires far more vegans to become involved in outreach, right? Anything that deters people from doing that and gives people an excuse not to do that is incredibly harmful, because it means, I mean, doing outreach does involve a bit of extra effort, and there's kind of two sort of types of outreach, really. There's outreach that people do in their everyday life as they're going about their everyday business. Like, for instance, I'm on a train, I kind of leave a leaflet on the seat. I'm just going about my everyday thing, and I'm kind of doing a bit of outreach. Or there's stuff where I'd go out of my way, like when I went out of my way earlier today to do a bit of door dropping, or I go out of my way to kind of hold a stall at an event. So there's that where you're kind of going out of your way, where you need to use a bit of spare time to do it. But we've all got some spare time. Even the most busy of us got some spare time we could devote to outreach. And it's really important that as many vegans as possible do that. But you'll see, you'll get, but it demands a bit of effort. It demands a bit of change, and people are resistant to change, and even people that regard themselves as vegans are resistant to change. So what will happen? It's kind of similar to, if you're educating people to become vegan, you'll find that they'll try and find any excuse not to be vegan. They'll come up with all these kind of ridiculous excuses, like look at my teeth, and and stuff like that. We've all heard the excuses that people will come up with because they don't want to change. Well, kind of in a sense, it's the same with vegans that are resistant to doing outreach. They kind of don't want to. They don't want to change. They don't want to take that further step, and they'll try and conjure up any excuse not to do it. And so, if you say, "Oh, veganism is a scare word," and like, "Oh, you don't want to be one of those pushy vegans," that gives those people an ideal excuse not to do outreach, and it's incredibly harmful. It's incredibly harmful to us building the movement we need to build. It's incredibly harmful to us, getting the amount of outreach we want to get. So if you've got a group like Animal Rising, yeah, it's brilliant that they're rescuing these individual animals and stuff like that. But if they're actually not saying that ordinary people should go vegan, and if they're saying, "Oh, well, we don't think you should say that people should be vegan because we think somehow that's not the right way to do it," what's happening is vegans that will use that as an excuse not to do outreach, and it actually harms what we're wanting to do. And it's the same with these other people that are kind of making out that veganism is a scare word. It's actually harming. It's actually damaging our potential for outreach, and so it's actually it's a negative thing.
Okay, I'm just watching a couple of things on the chat. So, someone's saying we've been a bit uncharitable towards Tobias Leonard. This needs possibly clearing up. I know this person is catching up with us on 1.5 speed, but yeah, Peter Singer and Alex O'Connor both say that they don't believe that rights exist. They talk about moral rights, and so they will talk about legal rights until the cows come home, the non-vegan phrase, but they don't believe in moral rights. And so they would agree probably with Bentham that moral rights are nonsense on stilts. So they both said openly and repeatedly that they don't believe in animal rights or human rights. And what they mean is moral rights. So I hope that clears that up a little bit.
But you see, the thing is that you see, you can even with that point of view, you can still believe in liberation. You can still believe that it's wrong for animals to be oppressed and exploited other animals oppressed and exploited by humans, you can still hold that view, right? And so in that sense, you can still. I mean, I have no problem with the concept of animal rights. I took part in an event on Sunday that promoted animal rights, and I want to see animal rights enshrined in law. The rights I consider that animals already have to be enshrined in law and respected, and I think that would be a huge move forward to the achievement of animal liberation. But I can see that someone can actually be against oppression of other animals, against the exploitation of other animals, without actually believing in rights. I think it's possible for someone to hold that position. But if we are going to end the oppression and exploitation of other animals, what we need enough people to actually believe in that. While the vast majority of people don't believe in that, while the vast majority of people think humans are superior to other animals, and that therefore we're entitled to use those other animals, we're entitled to oppress those other animals. While the vast majority of people believe that, we're never going to get anywhere. We're never going to get very far at all. All we're going to get is like a few tiny welfarist crumbs from the table, which is all we've ever got, right? What we have to do is we have to educate as many people as possible to actually believe in animal liberation, to be opposed to speciesism. We don't even have to educate a majority. We just have to educate enough people so that it comes to a tipping point. And I think that's been estimated probably about 25% of the population.
Isn't the problem, Ronnie? Isn't the problem here is the fact that we're selling the hard sell, and whereas the likes of Tobias and Melanie Joy are selling the easy sell. So if you go veggie, oppose carnism, don't oppose speciesism, that's easier, and all this kind of stuff. And so it's the usual thing. It's a little bit like the Greens in Germany in the 80s when they were getting prominent, and then all the other mainstream parties came out with a kind of light green version of similar kind of things. They got bought off.
The thing is, it's educating people to look at the world in a completely different way. You see,
but that's what I mean, Ronnie. If your position is not doing that, it's going to be easier, isn't it?
Well, it's going to be easier, but it's not going to achieve what we want to achieve. You see, the problem is there's this huge the problem is the vast majority of people exist in a false reality, and like I've got this. We had a show some while ago where I talked about my concept of the suprematrix, that it's compared to the film The Matrix. People existed in this false reality. It was created by machines, so the machines could kind of make use of people. They created a false reality in people's heads. And so what happens is people live this false reality where this the underlying horrific situation, unimaginably horrific situation of the oppression of other animals is kind of ignored. And it's kind of sort of almost kind of deliberately ignored. People are able to kind of keep that out of their heads, aren't they? And so so they exist, and sort of like all human activity, whatever it is, whether it's happy, whether it's sad, whatever we're doing, is done against this horrific backdrop of what happens to animals. Is kind of done, on top of this underlying, horrific situation that's that's ignored, and it's so most humans live in a state of false consciousness. In that they're not conscious of what's happening to the other animals, or they kind of don't want to be. They kind of block it out, and what we have to do is to kind of wake people up to the reality, and I'm a bit hesitant to say the thing about like making people awaken that, because it's like used by conspiracy theories, but in a sense we are kind of dealing with this huge conspiracy. There is this kind of huge conspiracy really to make people unaware of the true situation on Earth, of the true conditions of existence on this planet, which is that one species, the human, is total tyrant and oppressor of all the others, right? And in the most horrific ways, Right. That is the true reality of the conditions of resistance on this planet. And until sufficient people become aware of that and change accordingly, we're never going to get anywhere. And you don't make people aware of that through baby steps. You have to flip. They have to flip their they have to end their situation of false consciousness. They have to be made aware and awake to the true situation. And you cannot do that through baby steps. You can only do that by presenting people with what the true situation is. Now, the way you present that to people can be done in a kind of diplomatic way, can be done in a sensitive way, but it still has to be done. It still has to be done. And that's the only way I think that we can really change things.
Yeah, well, well, you can say that for the last 10 minutes as you've done, Ronnie, or you can go, hey, have you heard about the new vegan ice cream and have a cupcake?
Yeah, but that's not none of that's gonna create that flip in people's consciousness.
Oh,
We have
you
to
get
flip
more
people's
donations that
consciousness.
way, probably.
We have to change people's worldview. We have to change their worldview and get them to see the reality of what is really happening on this planet, right? And I don't see how you do that with baby steps. I don't see how you say that all you've got to do is tinker with your existing life and everything will be okay. That's kind of not going to do it. You know, how are you going to get like how are you going to get animal liberation by like creating more flexitarians? Because flexitarians want to eat meat and they'll still demand that, oh yeah, I still want to have some meat. So how are you going to kind of end animal agriculture by creating more flexitarians? You're not, are you? You're not. You're only going to end it by like creating more vegans. And we kind of need to.
Their argument there would be that maths thing that we saw before. So again, this one, which is that.
Yeah, but you see, but the point about that is going back like the kind of I would prefer that some if someone kind of halves their consumption of animal products, of course it's beneficial to other animals if they do that, and if that's genuinely the case, if someone just switches from meat to dairy. And even worse, if someone becomes a pescatarian, because actually pescatarians cause more suffering and slaughter because, the fish are such small animals that they're going to be more of them are going to be killed, aren't they, to feed that person, than if they stayed as a meat eater. But yes, I understand that. Yes, I understand that. But I think, but I think you get that. You get that anyway by spreading the vegan message. You'll get that anyway, because some people won't be able to make it. Some people will be able to say, yeah, I kind of understand what you're saying. Yeah, you are absolutely right. I kind of can't go all the way with you, but I'll do what I can. And people do that anyway, and people do that naturally. And we don't have to compromise on what we say to get that. We don't have to compromise.
I would agree with that. And there's two other things. First of all, why we get the less than vegan outreach being called vegan all the time is a problem. When they say themselves that they're veganish or that they're 90% vegan or these kind of issues, and so, but they will insist on calling what they're doing veganism, and also when they talk, they will usually attack vegans and call them names like purists and extremists and this kind of stuff. So, sometimes they will say, well, look, there's no reason why our things can't work in tandem, which is possibly true. But it would make it a lot easier if they didn't call what they did veganism, because it isn't, and they didn't attack vegans.
You see, I don't think it can work in tandem because, I'm going back to what I said before about it puts people off. We need to encourage people to spread the vegan message. We need as many vegans as possible to be out there spreading veganism. And if you go around saying, oh, veganism is a bit of a spare word, you shouldn't talk about veganism, then those people say, oh, right, yeah, well, that, yeah.
Yeah, but these people are never going to do it, Ronnie, and it compounds the problem by them saying what they do is also veganism. That compounds the problem.
Yeah. When it isn't, the thing is that we've, but like what we've seen is a general trend of organisations not being afraid to say vegan. We've had these organizations that used to talk about vegetarian now saying vegan, right? We have countless products in the shops labeled as vegan. All right, that's not, they're not talking about philosophical veganism, but they're using the word vegan, so obviously they're not kind of regarding, oh, someone's not going to eat this because it's got like vegan on it, so we need, rather than treat vegan and veganism as scare words, we need to make those words far more familiar, so they're much more familiar to people. So people see the word vegan everywhere. People see veganism everywhere, because we've got lots and lots of people doing outreach in different ways, like giving people information about veganism, so it becomes much more familiar. That's where we've got to go with it.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, and I mean, I agree with you, of course, that veganism needs to be the thing that is spread. And as we've said all the time, it's only the vegans that are going to do vegan outreach. And so another problem is when they're being asked to do non-vegan stuff all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I think it's really important that all vegans consider devoting some of their time to outreach, and it needn't take up any of their time. Like I said, just going around in your everyday life, you can kind of do things to promote veganism that doesn't use up any of your time. It's just being attentive to do that. It's just like getting some leaflets and having them with you to kind of put in places. That's all that means. It doesn't take up any of your time. No time and effort to do that, and we can all do that. And everyone's got spare time that we can devote to other forms of outreach that kind of do take up a bit of extra time. It can be the simplest thing and can fit it into your everyday life. I mean, we've got kind of, for instance, we've got someone in our local vegan group. She's a young mother. She works part-time. It's difficult to get her to get to like events and stuff, but she'll deliver a few leaflets around, put a few leaflets through letterboxes, in whatever time she's got available. And if everyone was to kind of do that, or the equivalent of that in other countries where they can't do door dropping, of course, then we'd be flying, because how did any of us become vegan? We all became vegan because we received information about veganism, didn't we? In one form or another. It might have been, with us older folks, it was more likely the written word. With me, it was an article in a magazine. With other people, it's a leaflet. Somebody might have seen a poster, or an article in the newspaper. And these days there are more people, a greater percentage of people that have been influenced by videos, by stuff online, and perhaps television adverts. And then there are a lot of people that need to be exposed to the message more than once for it to, for it to kind of have an effect. I mean, this is how the advertising industry works, doesn't it? By repetition of the same message, you see. And they obviously know what they do, and they invest millions into it. So the more we can disseminate the vegan message in as many ways as possible, the more vegans we will create, because that's how everyone becomes vegan. And it's just doing that. It's just mobilizing enough people to be able to do that sufficiently.
Well, I mean, I agree with you, and obviously you always say the same, that we need a lot more vegan activists. And the reason that we wanted to do this particular show was to reveal that vegan outreach has not been a failure. So, I mean, there'd be nothing more put off by people thinking that they're joining something which is a failed project in the first place. But it's not true. So the people who say, first of all, it's been around for years and years and years and years, that's not true. And secondly, it's been a failure. That's not true. No, it's not possible to declare it a failure when it's not really begun yet, really.
For the very tiny amount of vegan outreach that's actually taken place, the increase in veganism has really been quite considerable. So in that sense, it's been a huge success. It's just that we
can't attribute all of that to outreach.
No, it's not all attributed to outreach, but you see if you look at the fact that kind of obviously one thing that kind of has made it easier for people to actually kind of live as vegans, to kind of adopt the kind of practical side of vegan, where they're kind of consuming a vegan diet, that's a big part of it, is the availability of food, vegan food in stores, in supermarkets, etc. And like a kind of, I always say something in addition to that, which is that we've always had vegan food, because vegan food is like your fruit and your vegetables and your nuts and your grains and all that, and your kind of legumes. That's all vegan food. We've always had that. What I'm talking about is your kind of your sort of your products that kind of perhaps make it easier for someone to switch from the conventional diet of animal products to the vegan diet. You've got these you got your vegan cheese, you got your vegan versions of like fish, haven't you, and your vegan burgers and stuff like that, that kind of and these things are sort of like widespread everywhere now. When I first got vegan, you couldn't get anything like that. You couldn't eat out anywhere. Hardly anywhere had vegan options, right? Most bread you couldn't buy because it had animal fat in. And the situation is totally different now. It's kind of so much easier to kind of operate in society as a vegan, so to speak. But why have supermarkets done that? They've done that because more people have become vegan and they're catering. Yeah, they want to make money out of it. These companies want to make money out of these vegans, don't they? Like, let's produce products and sell them, and do that. Why have they done that? They've done that because more people have become vegan. Now, why have more people have become vegan? The reason those more people have become vegan is because those people have received information. Because the supermarkets wouldn't be able to sell vegan products to vegans if those people weren't vegans already. And yeah, I know that there are, it's not just vegans that buy those products. I know that like kind of there are people like flexitarians buy them and people, other folks buy them. But like, there's a hell of a lot of people that are vegan that buy them, but those people have been made vegan first, haven't they? Through information.
Let's end with addressing a few comments. Veganism is mostly diet related. I would disagree with that. So why the dislike for the push to dietary change? So I think this is a misreading of our position. And probably most kind of ethical vegans position, really.
The diet is a really important part of it, but it isn't just a diet. You see, this is the thing. Veganism is a philosophy.
Veganism is mostly justice related, not diet
justice related. It's about justice for other animals. It's about justice for everyone, really. But I particularly focusing on kind of what humans do to the wrongfulness of human actions towards other animals, and that we need to end that. And a huge part of ending that is not eating other animals and other animal products. That's a huge. So the diet is a really, really important part of it. But it's more than that.
It's bound to be. I mean, even when you've got abolitionists like Francione, they've got a book called "Eat Like You Care." So it's obvious that they are taking the
one thing
of it. It's when it's limited.
When it's limited,
the understanding of it is limited to that. That's a problem.
But it's important kind of entry point for people as well, because of all the kind of wrongful acts that humans do to other animals, the one that most people contribute to is in terms of those animals being oppressed and exploited for food. Like most people don't carry out animal experiments. Most people don't go hunting, for instance. But what people do almost universally is they'll consume animal products, and so that's the most kind of speciesist thing. That's the one kind of speciesist thing, the one human supremacist thing that almost everyone does.
Yeah, except that everybody's walking around full of pharmaceuticals and got animal tested stuff all over their bodies as well.
Yes, I mean that's true, but you see, it's actually easier for people to change their diet because of course when you're talking about like you know, if say someone is taking a drug that they consider to be essential to, you know, for them to survive, yeah, those products have been tested on animals, but it's not that person's fault that that product has been tested on animals. If that's the only one, and in fact, the main problem is that when when they kind of when they create a demand for those products by consuming them, what they're actually doing is causing money to be put into companies that carry out animal experiments, and that money may fund further experiments. You know, that's kind of fundamentally what the problem is.
What do you say to this one, Ronnie? What has the Vegan Society been doing for 35 years?
Well, I think not. You see, I mean, the Vegan Society kind of, yeah, the Vegan Society does promote veganism. It's not great on street outreach. They've got this kind of sort of volunteer scheme where they're kind of trying to get, you know, people in local areas to kind of to do outreach, but it's kind of it seems to be only a very, very minor part of what they do. A huge part of what they do is kind of like certifying products to have the official vegan mark on them. You know, that's a really big part of what they do. So certifying products vegan, you know, which kind of which is important. But you see, I often think if I could have my time again, what I would do is, you know, way back. I mean, I'm talking way back, like the kind of probably the 1960s, perhaps. Is I would get in touch with the Vegan Society and try and get involved with them and try and say, right, what we need to do is street outreach. What we need to do is to get out on the street and promote veganism.
Yeah, well, that's what Francione says about all the groups in the current.
Yeah. But you see, the Vegan Society never did that. The Vegan Society didn't do that in the early days. Yeah,
but again, that's part of our problem. We didn't see them as part of the movement.
We didn't see them, no. But you see,
we know, Ronnie, that we saw the League Against Cruel Sports as part of the animal rights movement, which was wrong. We saw Compassionate Wolf Farming as part of the animal rights movement, which was wrong. And we ignored the Vegan Society.
I think the reason is because they were campaigning organisations. We saw them. What happened was when the movement became kind of more militant and kind of more grassroots, and a lot more people got involved in it in the 1970s. That started in the 1970s. Maybe the 60s if you're kind of talking about the hunt sabs, but mainly the 70s. That what happened is we just carried on this. We just kind of made the existing campaigns more militant and more grassroots, and because so we looked to organisations that were campaigning, right, even if their campaigns were welfarist, and we kind of just made those campaigns more grassroots. Like we'd do street stalls with Compassionate World Farming leaflets. You know, we'd take their kind of their stuff to the grassroots level, you see, but it was still welfarist. And I think because the Vegan Society wasn't seen as wasn't a campaigning organisation, we didn't include them in what we were doing. And I think had they been a campaigning organisation, had they actually been
they still had leaflets. There's no reason why we couldn't
still had leaflets, but they weren't campaigning organisations really in the same way that the anti-vivisection groups were and Compassion World Farming were.
What you're really saying, this is code for they weren't single issue, and so
they weren't single issue. But you see, I think had they kind of had more of a kind of, you know, had they been saying to people, look, you know. It's great that you're a vegan, but now you need to get out and spread the vegan message. Had that been part of what they were about?
What if they'd have been saying to people, well, it's great that you're an anti-vivisectionist, but if you really want to bring about the end of vivisection, then you need to get a population which is culturally.
Yeah. I mean, that would have been right. And of course the single issue groups weren't saying that at all, and of course,
it's because cultural speciesism is always our main problem. Now, my answer to this, because this is quite a nuanced and difficult question. First of all, in their very early years, bearing in mind they were founded during the last years of the so-called Second World War, mean, a lot of them were still subject to rationing and stuff at the end of the year. In fact, rationing in Britain went on into the 60s, or at least the effect of rationing went on into the 60s. And so there was a kind of a difficulty of campaigning. It was all pre-internet, of course. Donald Watson was kind of really left to it for the first 18 months to 2 years. So it was a bit chaotic until the 1970s. The Vegan Society was actually in people's houses, like Kathleen Janaway. I always make that joke that she lived in Leatherhead, and the headquarters of the Vegan Society was in Leatherhead. And so in terms of that, the Vegan Society was fairly chaotic as a social movement organization, but they did found the vegan social movement. They gave it a name, and then when it comes to our time, as we've just said, we ignored them, so they just kind of went on their merry way. And then when we get to the 1990s, when there's a push, not least by people like Gary Francione, to make veganism the moral baseline, then of course the relevance of the Vegan Society hit us for the first time as something that's significant. The Vegan Society suddenly became significant from being totally ignored for most of their existence till then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so I mean, they're kind of the fact that they were kind of just muddling along was partly our fault. First of all, we didn't get involved, like you said, and got them to be a campaigning group.
That's the one thing I do. I often think, like, we all like to think what we would do if we had our time again. We all think that, and that's what I do. As soon as I was old enough, I'd say, right, I'm going to get involved in the Vegan Society. I encourage them and say, look, what you need to do is we need to get this message out at a grassroots level. What we need to do is people who are vegan, is we need to encourage them to actually do outreach and get some leaflets to them, get them to do street stalls and kind of spread the message.
But don't forget, Ronnie, don't forget, we are talking about, I mean, look at the Francione thing from 96. He's still calling himself a vegetarian. And so, you see, veganism really it wasn't on the animal rights map. And now, this sounds like a bizarre, absurd thing to say right now in this day and age, that veganism wasn't central to what we did. We used to do loads of press. We never talked about it.
No,
it just never. It's almost like it was invisible within the animal rights movement. Veganism was invisible, apart from this little food group who used to put out these quaint little magazines every now and again, and that was about it, really, until the 1990s. And we're not talking about the beginning of the 1990s. We're talking about the mid-90s towards the end.
Yeah. And I think even when the ALF attacked targets associated with animal farming, I don't think we even talked about veganism then. I think we kind of tended to talk more about the cruelty rather than. I remember there was an attack on a place that made equipment. It's in North London. There was an attack on a place that made equipment for debeaking chickens. The ones that are in the battery cages, and kind of. I was interviewed by the press about that, and I'm quite sure I didn't talk about veganism. I just talked about
just don't debeak them, I suppose.
Yeah, just about the cruelty of and the cruelty of, like, battery farming, and that these people were making equipments for battery farm. I can't recall that I said people should go vegan.
Here's one for us. My one is this, as people who know me know. I'll just drop that out so you can see it. So this is 1 year into the foundation of the vegan social movement, but this isn't really a definition. This was Donald Watson answering a question. But I tend to think that this sentence, and you could do without whether it's profitable or not, even you could end at sentient life. I agree with Ronnie that if you put the word and oppression, it would improve it vastly. I agree with that. But when they talked about exploitation in those days, they were talking about animal use. And I know that's still got a problematic element for you, Ronnie, but that's essentially what they were talking about. So this one, I think, is quite good. Now, in terms of the question, I've watched a couple of programs by Reasonable Vegan, and with all due respect, your understanding of the definitional part of veganism is pretty shallow. and you need to do a lot of reading, because generally speaking, when you talk on your show about the definition of veganism, most of what you say is wrong. And so, really what you need to do is engage, like somebody said, I think it was Andy in the thing, read Leslie Cross, because although Watson said this in 1945, it was 1949 when Cross said, hang on a minute, we don't have a definition of veganism. Okay, we need to work on the definition of veganism. And that's what they started to do. And so through the media of their publication, The Vegan, from about 1949 right through to 55, they kind of thought out loud, mainly through Leslie Cross, about the definition of veganism. And then they ended up with a justice for all philosophy, which the animals only people tend not to like. And the problem there is the fact that essentially what Cross produced was a focus and a scope of veganism. So the focus is animal liberation and our relations with the animals. The scope is much wider. What the animals only people do is look at the definition of the scope from Cross and take that as being the whole of veganism, which is a misreading of Cross. In those times, 40s and 50s, people they weren't typing on Twitter. It wasn't sound bites in those days. They expressed themselves in long form, in essays, and you have to read all of it in context to contextualize what they said. So really taking individual, although that's exactly what I've done here in a sense, but taking individual sentences is not a great help when you're talking about these people's writings. Okay, so we need to go to Leslie Cross and read all of it to get a full version of what was going on. And what you end up with is focus and scope, and veganism is about justice for all. Right. How are we going to bring this to a close, Ronnie? We're coming up to 2 hours.
Well, yes. I mean, to kind of sum up, I'd say that kind of once again that in terms of the very tiny amount of vegan outreach that's really taken place, that there have been considerable gains in terms of the increase in veganism. And I think we can extrapolate from that if we would have more vegan outreach, then that.
Well, the main thing, though, Ronnie, is that you can't declare it a failure or dead before it starts.
No. And of course, we've never believed it was a failure. And kind of the reason why we've asked the question, is vegan outreach a failure, is because just recently we've kind of had, instances of people pretty much saying it was. I mean, we had kind of, the animal rising folks that don't want to mention the word vegan, and then
let's name them and shame them. It's
it's not
wasn't it?
Kind of question like that. It's just that kind of perhaps to help them have a greater understanding of what the true situation is. That you can't call something a failure if it's hardly been tried, and when the extent to which it has been tried has led to considerable success.
Yeah, it seems to be good. Going back to AR Zone, Ronnie, one thing that I was going to mention and I didn't. Going back to AR Zone, only 10 years ago, right? Barbara DeGrand, who was part of the AR Zone team, she said, and she was in North America, she was saying that she couldn't found it very difficult to find leaflets mentioning veganism. That's how she put it. So you couldn't even get, if you wanted to give them out, you couldn't find them. You'd have to do it yourself.
I don't think you could here. I think possibly the Vegan Society produced some leaflets, but these other organisations now that produce the majority of, like Viva, for instance, are churning leaflets promoting veganism out all the time, and and kind of doing it from different angles and in different ways. That it's happening. They're doing it really frequently. You kind of get the same, like say from Animal Aid, perhaps to a lesser extent, but they do the same. And you've got other groups like mentioning veganism on their literature. This stuff's like really easy to come by now.
Yeah, Ronnie, what one point, and we didn't mention this with Animal Rising, we should have done, is if we got a kind of indication that they think that veganism is a scare word. Tobias Leonhardt certainly still does, and there's no doubt about it that if he's in consultation with Animal Rising, he'll be telling them to go spare on the word vegan, but don't just the supermarkets. Prove them wrong.
And the strange, you see, the strange thing is, like, they're activists, like kind of. I took part in National Animal Rights Day, the event in Birmingham. There was like probably about half of the people that took part in that were involved in Animal Rising, and they're those people, like they're grassroots activists taking part in an event, like openly promoting animal rights and openly promoting veganism. And yet, and they're grassroots activists of an organisation that is afraid to say the word. It's kind of very odd, that you've got something at the top that doesn't reflect that, the views of the kind of leadership, the kind of, the people that lay down the policy. Completely at odds.
Maybe it's a little bit too. Maybe it's a little bit too rough to say. Afraid to use the word a bit. I mean, they've been advised not to.
Well, kind of they think it's harmful to use the word. They think in some way it's kind of detrimental to use the word, and that somehow you can, get people to guess that they should be vegan without saying it. I mean, it just seems like really, really strange to me, and it isn't really in line with that. Isn't in line with historical evidence of kind of what's happened.
No, Andy's suggesting that the grassroots are being used, but I mean, there's always been. There used to be a bit of a symbiotic relationship in the sense that, like you would get some documents and you couldn't really do much with them yourself. So you took them down to a national group and they would pretend that they'd had them kind of left on their doorstep overnight and this kind of stuff. And so there used to be a bit of a relationship. And if you knew the right people, you could get some funding for, different kind of things. But there was never a structure where the rich groups would funnel money through to the grassroots. It was, if anything, the other way around. They were always asking the grassroots to raise money for them. So the money was always going the wrong way, as far as I could see in the movement. And so that in itself has got to be counter-revolutionary in terms of development of the grassroots. It's got to be, Ronnie, hasn't it?
Oh yes. I mean, there's kind of never really be enough focus on like, what we need to do is to set up, a whole really large network of grassroots groups, and to fund that, to promote that.
I suppose Animal Aid got nearest, though. Yeah, Animal Aid got nearest.
Well, I think yes. I think at one time, Animal Aid kind of had a list of local animal rights groups that people could get involved in. And I think they stopped publishing the list because I think there was some people got attacked, in the homes by kind of, I think it was some people from an intensive poultry farm where there'd been a protest. And so they stopped doing that, but they still said, well, there are groups in these areas, and if you want to get in touch with them, then let us know. And then they,
they could get around that by just funding PO boxes.
Yeah, of course they could. Yeah, they could do that, or just basically like using themselves as one big PO box and then forwarding the stuff onto by saying we've got groups in this, and they did do that. Now I'm not sure that they do that anymore. I mean, there's an initiative from Viva to set up local outreach, to get local outreach groups going. I mean, they want these groups to kind of sort of represent Viva in a way that that they're going to be supplied with leaflets from Viva, and kind of, it's going to be, very, very much like, or almost like local Viva groups, but it's still local outreach. And I think it's still very much a step in the right direction, and something that I'm pleased to see. And I think this is kind of the way it's got to be. We need local vegan outreach groups everywhere, in every town, in every suburb of every city. And because suburbs are cities, there's places where you can do a stall. They have little shopping places. There's rows and rows of houses where people could deliver leaflets. There's community events where people could do stalls. There's a whole range of opportunities to do outreach in these areas, and there are vegans in these areas, and it's a question of mobilizing them, helping them to get active. And I think, like, what I would ideally like to see, and I mean, I'm obviously talking specifically about the UK, but it could happen all over the world. It is for people to be employed in regional areas to stimulate outreach. In other words, those people would be employed to go to local areas, get together with local vegans and say, look, I let me help you to get outreach going in this area, and then give them a hand, get them going, and kind of do that in various towns in the area.
Got to be done very carefully. This idea of parachuting in expertise,
Well, the thing is, I think it's just a question of, like, giving people, because you're dealing often with people that have got kind of no experience of outreach, and so to have an experienced person that's kind of done that comes along and says, look, let me help you to get this set up and to get this going, right? And
we've got the internet for now, Ronnie, no?
Yeah, well, yeah, but you see, yes, we have got the internet, but to kind of have a more hands-on approach where somebody comes along and says, well, look, I'll be with you when you do your first info store, or and I'll be with you. I'll kind of show you the ropes. I'll kind of because, like, we've done that with people ourselves. In our group, like, we have people come along, they've never done it before, they're nervous, and we'll say, well, look, watch us, see, watch us as we talk to people and what we do, and then they'll watch and learn the ropes, and then they'll do it, and it's the same. It's the same thing. Sometimes you need that hands-on approach.
I imagine that's something to do with fishing, probably. But Andy says about the paying people to do your activism. But I mean, what about the other way around? I mean, if we had a system where, and I know that money is not the only thing, but if they've got advice and ideas, and a little bit of money would help.
Well, I think some funding to kind of, you'd just help with basic, because obviously, if you're doing an information store, you need good visuals, you need good placards, you need something to attract people. There's that kind of thing, and obviously that kind of, you might need a banner for your stall and stuff like that. I mean, obviously that there's some expense involved in that people could be helped with. I mean, a lot of it's quite homespun. I mean, we use stuff locally that's kind of very homespun, that's kind of knocked together. We knocked it together very cheaply. It still looks good. We use a gazebo that cost 20 quid. It still hasn't been destroyed by the winds after several years. But you don't need to necessarily, like, be spending like loads of money, but some funding would help. But I think it's more that kind of, in practical terms, if you're going to have these people that are in the regions that stimulate outreach, I think that obviously it's important. That's a full-time job, and so
you must have banned wind in your area if you've got a gazebo, a 20 quid gazebo that's lasted for years.
Well, I think it might be just. I think it might be just kind of, might just be good luck. I mean, the previous one from that got destroyed in a hurricane. But it was at an event where, like, everyone's gazebo was destroyed. Even like the £100 gazebos were destroyed. Right. Such was the force of the wind.
Veg Fund. Somebody's pointing out Veg Fund, and of course there's the pollination project as well.
Veg Fund are good. I mean,
they've got some pretty strict rules, haven't they?
Well, what you do with Veg Fund, it's usually Veg Fund tend to more fund specifically events. I think they might. It's worth kind of looking at their kind of website or whatever, because they might have a fund for sort of like general long-term outreach, but Veg Fund tend to more fund specific events. Like, for instance, we put on like a couple of we put on a couple of vegan fairs that they funded. We put on a film show promoting veganism that they funded. We do online advertising as well that they funded, but I think that's coming to an end. I think that was very much to do with COVID, when people couldn't really get out on the street, and so they put a lot of resources into funding on online outreach, and I think they've stopped doing that now that the COVID thing's kind of receded. But yes, I mean, it's worth looking, but it's more specific things that they'll fund rather than you kind of generalized long-term outreach. But I mean, if you're in the UK, it would be worth getting in touch with Viva. If you go on Viva's website. What you need to do is go on the menu and click on the Get Involved section. And in the Get Involved section, there's stuff about, setting up a local outreach group and how they can help you. So that would be one thing you could do in the UK. I don't know what the situation would be in other countries in terms of getting that sort of help.
Okay, Ronnie, we're over 2 hours now, so we ought to say bye, I think. So the take home is something has not failed if it hasn't started yet.
Something hasn't failed if it hasn't really started yet, and when the small extent to which it has started has been like really successful considering how limited it's been. And it just shows
although we've got to be critical about that, because I mean, obviously it's not just outreach that done all that. So
it's not just it's kind of isn't just outreach, but it's been stimulated by outreach. The fact that kind of it's easier to kind of live as a vegan, and that's probably attracted more people to it. The only reason that that's come about is through outreach. That's what's kind of created that situation. So outreach is like, and the dissemination of information about veganism is lies at the core of that.
Right. Okay. Well, to stop us repeating exactly everything that we just said, I'll say I'll say thanks a lot for everyone who is still with us, and smash a like on YouTube if you haven't already, and thanks very much for that. And we shall be back next week, providing, Ronnie,
we are still alive.